In this video, we are going to discuss the game played in the Tata Steel Masters 2022 between Vidit Gujrathi versus Praggnanandhaa. Both these two players are from India, and I think mostly every Indian chess fan was waiting for this interesting encounter. This game is from the round 10 of the Tata Steel Masters 2022. And this game is actually very interesting because Praggnanandhaa is the youngest player in the tournament from India, and Vidit is well known grandmaster from India, India number 2, and actually a very strong chess player. So let's check it out this interesting encounter. So Vidit with the white pieces started out the game with 1d4, and Praggnanandhaa with the black pieces replied with knight to f6, c4, e6, and now we have knight to c3. So Vidit goes for the Nimzo. Basically Praggnanandhaa goes for the Nimzo by playing bishop to b4, and here we have queen to c2. The idea of playing queen c2 in this position is, if black goes for capturing the knight, you can go for capturing the bishop with the queen, and which makes your pawn structure very nice. Short castle, a3, bishop into c3, because going back with the bishop doesn't make any sense. You will give white more space on the queen side. That is why we have a trade. d5, bishop to g5, pinning up the knight, and now we have c5 by Praggnanandhaa. Definitely a very nice approach, going for opening up the center as black have safely castled. So Vidit decided to simply capture the pawn on c5 because the pawn is not yet protected on c5. d4, queen to f3. In the game between Praggnanandhaa versus Richard Trappert played in this tournament of Masters 2022, the game went by playing queen to g3. But Vidit, as he analyzed that game because he was against Praggnanandhaa, so he decided to change the variation a bit by playing queen to f3. The idea of playing queen f3 is, you are basically hitting the knight on f6 twice, and second, you are also putting some pressure on the pawn on b7. So Praggnanandhaa simply decided to play knight to d7, protecting the knight and also putting some pressure on the pawn on c5. e3, a very logical move from the white side. Capturing a pawn is not a good idea because after queen into e3, white queen protects the bishop, protects the pawn, and after rook d1, I think black is already in a huge trouble. So after e3, in this position you can't even go for capturing the pawn on c5 because I can simply go for capturing the knight, and after queen takes, I can have a queen trade, and after pawn takes pawn, I'm simply a pawn up, hitting the knight, and white is simply better. So finally we have h6 on the board, hitting the bishop. So Vidit decided to not complicate the things much more, and he simply decided to capture the knight. Knight takes, and now knight can no longer capture the pawn on c5. And in this position, after knight into f6, he decided to do a long castle. The idea of playing long castle looks very sensible. First of all, now the pawn cannot capture the e-pawn because the queen is hanging, and white is putting more pressure on the pawn on d4. Very logical. Although the king on c1 looks a bit of weakness because the light squares are extremely weak. Black can infiltrate by playing queen a5, something like that. So we have simply e5 by black, protecting the pawn on d4. Knight to e2, and now we have d3, hitting the knight. Knight goes to c3, and now we have bishop to g4. And after playing bishop g4, it looks like black is winning because white simply pinned the queen as well as the rook. So black is going to be simply an exchange plus, and it's going to be winning for black. For example, if white continues by playing queen into b7, capturing the pawn, black can simply go for capturing the rook, and after white captures the bishop back with the knight or with the king, it doesn't matter. I can simply go for playing e4. I'm having a perfect center control. My d pawn is extremely strong. I'm an exchange plus. White king is extremely weak, and it's completely winning for black. But actually this position is actually a theory. So after playing bishop to g4, Vidit simply decided to play rook into d3, simply capturing the pawn with the rook, hitting the queen, and white queen is also hanging on f3. If black goes for capturing the queen, I can simply go for capturing the black queen, and after black captures the rook, I can simply go for capturing the bishop, And in this position, what is happening is basically white is an exchange down, agreed, but in the exchange, white is having 2 pawn advantage. So for example, rook c8, we have b4, and after b6, trading the pawns, king c2, and I think white is much more comfortable. Although, in spite of being an exchange down, white is having 2 pawns extra than black, which gives white a queenside pawn majority, which can be very dangerous for black. So, capturing the queen was not a right move, and Praggnanandhaa knew it, so he decided to play queen to a5. Still, the queen is hanging on f3, so we have queen to g3, queen into c5, capturing the pawn and also protecting the e5 pawn, rook to d2, and now after playing rook d2, it's a completely new position. All those moves were, all the game played till here was like, all the theory, the games were played in the past, but now after playing rook d2, it's a completely new game. After playing rook d2, white simply protects the pawn on c4, bishop e6, and now we have b4 by Vidit, basically exposing white's own king. It looks like b4 looks actually very scary from the white side because you are simply exposing your own king, yeah? But it's actually prepared by Vidit, I personally feel. This was all his preparation because playing b4 looks actually very dangerous for white because you are simply opening up your own king. The c file is open, the a file could be a very great problem for white. So after playing b4, black decided to pull the queen back and white simply decided to capture the pawn on e5. Bishop into c4, king to b2, and now we have a5, a very logical move and a human move from the black side, trying to open up the white king and also open up the a file for the rook. We have b5, we have a bishop trade, and now we have queen to c4, attacking the rook on f1. So we have rook c1. Idea could be to remove the knight from the c1, c3 and put some discover attacks on the queen. And here black decided to play a4, a very logical move. Firstly, stopping this a4 so that the b5 and the a4 would be get connected and it would be hard for black to attack the white king. So after playing a4, now b3 square is extremely weak for white. And it could be a very dangerous square for the white as well. And now here we have knight to b1. And actually at the place of playing knight to b1, a much better move was to play something like queen to e7. The idea of playing queen e7 is very deep. First of all, you are basically protecting the pawn on a3 with the queen. And after something like queen to b3 check, I can play king a1. And if black tries to attack the queen, I can simply pull my queen back to b4. And the idea here is, if black goes for trading the queens, firstly I'm a pawn up. Second, as the queen has been traded, so there is no such attacking chances for black to attack the white king. And it's actually, in this position, white is the one who is better. So this was the idea of playing queen e7, but extremely hard to find. So we have knight to b1, protecting the pawn on a3 with the knight basically, and also hitting the queen. Queen to b3 check, king to a1, and now we have rook to c8, asking for a rook trade. Vidit traded the rooks. Queen to f5, hitting the rook. Black played queen to c4, protecting the rook. Rook to d4, queen to c7, and now we have g3. Engine says that it's a much better move would have been to play rook into a4, capturing the pawn. Basically, the queen cannot go for capturing the pawn on h2 because the rook is hanging. But Vidit decided to first play g3, b6, and now he decided to capture the pawn. Knight d7, idea is to definitely play knight c5. It's the most ideal square for the knight. Rook to e4, g6 hitting the queen, and here we have queen to f4. And after queen f4, it looks like white is hitting the queen as well as hitting the pawn on h6. So the most natural move comes to everyone's mind is to capture the queens. And after rook into f4, in this position, white is the one who is better. White is firstly having 6 pawns and black is having 4 pawns. So definitely white is 2 pawn plus and white is completely winning. But Praggnanandhaa played the fantastic and the best move in this position. Queen to c5, basically giving up the pawn on h6 if white wants to grab the pawn. But they simply gone for capturing the pawn on h6, which was a blunder, completely blunder, which gave white a completely winning advantage. The best move for white in this position was to play rook b4, protecting the pawn on b5 and keeping the king a bit of safe, keeping the king safe. But after capturing the pawn, Pragnanda simply captured the pawn on b5, and it's like already bar is showing that it's completely winning for black. a4 hitting the queen, queen to c6 hitting the rook, queen to f4, knight to c5 hitting the rook, hitting the pawn, rook to c4. You cannot go for capturing the c4 pawn because the queen is hanging, and here we have rook to d8, which was not a good move by Praggnanandhaa. The best move, and actually it looks the most natural move in this position. Rook to a8. Simply hitting the pawn on a4, and now it's a triple attack on the pawn on a4. So if I tries to go for playing knight to c3, defending the pawn, yeah, now it's a triple defend. So here black can simply play b5, attacking the fourth attacker in the game, hitting the pawn, hitting the rook, and it's already over. You can't even go for capturing the pawn with the knight because after queen into b5, I'm simply a knight plus, and you cannot capture my queen. The pawn is pinned. This was the idea. Rook a2 was actually looks pretty nice and looks very obvious because you are simply hitting the queen. You are simply hitting the king. But this idea was missed by Praggnanandhaa, and perhaps he wants to bring the rook on d5, and there could be some ideas. Rook to c2 by Vidit, and now we have queen to h1. Black was actually having still the chance of playing rook a8, and it's still winning for black. But queen to h1, pinning up the knight, and perhaps the idea is to play rook to d1, something like that. Queen to b4, and now finally we have knight into a4. This was the idea of Vidit. He captured the pawn because in this position, if white tries to capture the knight, I can simply play rook to a8, and the queen is basically protecting the rook, and the rook is simply hitting the queen and the king. And after queen into a8 check, queen into h8, king b1, this position is actually better for black, but okay, at least it's playable position. The bar showing that black is having a slight advantage, but it is at least playable position. But from the practical view, it looks like black is having a pawn on b6 with the queen. It looks like black is completely winning. This is the point, yeah. It's the best move according to the engine, but from the human move, it doesn't look a natural move. So Vidit decided to play rook to d2 in this position, asking for a rook trade, and Praggnanandhaa simply played rook to c8. Not going for the rook trade, and idea is to play something like rook c1. White still can't go for capturing the knight because rook 8 is extremely strong. Queen to e7, queen to a8. Some deadly discoveries are going to come. Rook a2, b5, now simply protecting the knight. Queen comes to b4, and now here we have queen to h1. You basically cannot go for capturing the b5 pawn because knight c3, it's already game over. The knight cannot capture the knight is pinned. So we have rook to a3, and here we simply have queen into h2. Here in this position, you still can't go for capturing the pawn because here we have queen to h8 check, king to a2 check, king b3 check, takes, and here we have queen b2 check, king moves, and black captures the knight. Rook versus queen, black is winning. So we have queen to d2, queen to h5, f4, queen to f5, queen d3, asking for a queen trade. White king is extremely weak, so white wants to trade the queens at any cost. White wants to trade the queen. We have queen f6, so Vidit tried his best to trade the queens, and the position we landed here is queen to e5. And Vidit is like, I'm happy to trade the queens, even my pawn structures become bad. So Praggnanandhaa decided to trade the queens, and white is having extremely bad pawn structure. Here we simply have rook to e8 by Praggnanandhaa, rook to b3, and here black simply goes for capturing the pawn, and black rook is also protecting the pawn on b5, and black is the pawn up. It's actually winning position, but it's not so clear. But the way Praggnanandhaa converted it is simply phenomenal. Knight a3, hitting the pawn on b5, knight to c5, hitting the rook. White captured the pawn, and black here captured the pawn on e3. You cannot go for capturing the knight on c5 because here comes check by capturing the knight. King b2, black captures the pawn. Black is having 2 pawn lead, and it's completely winning position for black. So we have knight to c4, rook check, king to b2, knight to e4, hitting the pawn. g4, check, king to c1, knight to f2, hitting another, hitting still the g4 pawn. g5, g5 is force. We have king to g7, knight to d2, rook to e8, king b2, rook c8, and after a couple of moves, we have a knight trade on the board. And after rook into d2, now rook, I think all of you know that rook endgames are always very complicated, because converting a rook endgame where your opponent is, where you can say you are having a 1 pawn advantage, it's still not easy. We have rook to c1 by Praggnanandhaa, rook to a2, king to g8, check, king to h7, rook a2, king to g7, rook to a5 protecting the pawn, king f8, and here we have rook to a7. And after rook a7, here we have king to e8. And the idea of playing king e8 is actually, first of all, you want to bring a king outside of the game, outside of this chain, because to attack the pawn on g5. And after king e8, white is actually having no moves to play in this position. White wants to cut off the king, but he can't, because first of all, you cannot play rook b7 because rook b1 and you lose the rook. You can't play this rook to c7 because rook is covering that square, and the king is covering the d7 and the e7 square. And even you can't even move your king for as a waiting move, because if you try to move your king, I can simply play rook to c5 and the pawn is dead on g5. So basically, white is actually having no move and he have to play something. So it's basically like a zugzwang. White was forced to leave this file, and here we have simply king to d7, rook a6, and here we have king e7, another waiting move. White is forced to move this file, rook to a2, king to e6, rook a5, and now here we have rook to f5. Idea is very simple, wants to play rook f5, hitting the rook, hitting the pawn. So we have a check, king to e5, a very nice try by Vidit. You cannot play king f5 because here comes rook to f6 check, protects the pawn. You are forced to capture the pawn, and after takes, 2 pawn rook, and it's completely winning for white. White can simply bring the king near the pawns, and it's over for black. So we have king e5, a nice move by Praggnanandhaa. Rook a5 check, and here we have king to f4. King c3, king to g4, and black is simply going to play rook to f5, capturing the pawn, 2 pawn advantage, and it's all over. So on the move number, after playing king to g4, on the move number 78, after 7 hours of long game, with the white pieces decided to resign the game, and we have the winner of the tournament, winner of the round number 10, Praggnanandhaa against Vidit. It was a fantastic game, a very long game lasting 7 hours. Incredible. Yeah. Praggnanandhaa managed to win against such a strong player like Vidit Gujrathi. This shows that he's not afraid of anything, and he continuously lost 3 games in a row. Like, he first lost against Magnus Carlsen, then Mamedyarov, and then Karyakin. And in the 10th round, he decided to come back by beating Vidit. It was a very nice performance played by Praggnanandhaa as well as Vidit Gujrathi. So if you like this game, then make sure to like the video. If you're new to my channel, then make sure to subscribe the channel, and make sure to share this video with everyone to know about this interesting analysis of this game, because by analyzing games and by watching the games, we get to know about how to play this position, and we get many knowledge about the positions. So I'm going to come up with these interesting videos like this. So make sure to stay tuned and keep watching One Shot Chess.